Hello, and welcome to the Catholic University of Lublin. Today we're going to take you on a little tour of the campus and introduce you to some of the facilities you're going to come into contact with. This is my friend Michael from Colombia, and today we're going to have a little bit of fun. Welcome to the main courtyard of KUL. Now this is the more relaxation area, natural area for both students at KUL, as well as people in Lublin generally. Now the courtyard's surrounded by flowers and big magnolias that provide shadows for the students and relaxers. Now, over in the distance, you'll see a statue of John Paul II and Cardinal Wyszynski.
Who's Cardinal Wyszynski?
He is the primate of Poland and is actually very strongly connected to both KUL campus as well as the Catholic Church in Poland. Now, John Paul II was actually a teacher at the Catholic University of Lublin, and KUL has a very strong connection with our favorite patron.
Well, that's great, but what sort of events do you have here on campus for students?
Well, there's quite a few events. Everything from memorial lectures to lectures given by guest professors from other countries, to concerts, to public masses celebrated in this courtyard for everyone to attend. Now, if you're coming here for World Youth Day, you'll be experiencing all of those and getting the full KUL experience through it.
Great, but I don't know if I can discuss all this on an empty stomach. I'm getting kind of hungry. Where should I go to eat while I'm here?
Well, Polish food is quite delicious, and you actually have several options about where you can eat.
Like what?
Well, for instance, we have Mensa cafeteria, as well as small restaurants that circle the campus like any other college town. So if you want anything from pierogies to naleśniki to schnitzel, doesn't matter. You'll be able to find it here and fill your stomach.
That sounds delicious. Sounds wonderful.
Mm-hmm. It is. It is. Why don't I take you there? Here we have a very basic staple of Polish food, shredded vegetables. Now we have beets over here, carrots over here, coleslaw, as we say in English, and a few other things. Now, these vegetables are usually mixed together, shredded, and we usually add sour cream or some other thing to hold them together. My personal favorite, though, is the carrot. All right, now up next we have our basic heavy grains and the carbs. We have the Polish staple, mashed potatoes. Behind it we have barley, and to the left we have fried potatoes. Now, you wouldn't truly be Polish unless you got yourself a nice big scoop of mashed potatoes. Now at the next station, we have our cutlets, just pieces of meat covered in bread and fried. Now, we have a choice between chicken or pork. I think I'm gonna go with chicken. It wouldn't be Poland unless we had some pierogies. Now, pierogies are a little bit like dumplings. Say, if you've ever been to a Chinese restaurant, kind of similar, but much different. Now, pierogies come in different kinds of flavors. Today we have meat pierogies, spinach pierogies, and barley meat pierogies. Now, I'm feeling a little bit hungry today, so I'm going to go with a few meat pierogies and maybe a spinach one. Now, checking out is relatively easy. At KUL, the amount you have to pay is based on the weight. So, you wait for the pretty cashier to come up, weigh it on the scale, and pay your bill. That's it. Eat kompot. Kompot is my favorite Polish drink. It's basically a fruit syrup made from natural ingredients that you mix together with water. So it's somewhat similar to syrup, but there's no corn syrup and it's a lot healthier. Smacznego. It tastes great. Bardzo smakuje. Besides being connected to the Catholic University, John Paul II is also one of the greatest patron saints of Poland. He was canonized a few years ago, and since then has become a titan of both Polish identity and KUL's identity. Now, the amazing thing about John Paul II is that he was able to bring the heights of Catholic theology down to the individual person. And he also fought against the communist system through peaceful and very calm methods. Now, if you're excited about John Paul II, why don't we go to the chapel? We actually have a relic of his, and we could see more of him. Actually, Michael, before we go to the chapel, let's make a little bit of a stop at the Faculty of Philosophy. Now, this is actually where John Paul II taught and was a student, and it's very much connected both with John Paul II as well as Krampiec, the founder of the Lublin method of Thomism, which is a very existential and humanist approach to the Thomistic method. Why don't we go take a look? Now, John Paul II was developed in a very classical but also very diverse method of philosophy. So everything from the great classics of Plato and Aristotle to metaphysics to methodology, he had a smattering of all of that. He was very much connected to a philosopher named Krampiec, who was more of a Thomist, but a regimental Thomist. So him and Krampiec had a little bit of a debate and sometimes clashed, but in the end, John Paul II was able to take some of those ideas and developing his theology of the body, and Krampiec was able to take some of John Paul II's personalism and apply it to his Thomism.
That sounds fascinating.
Now this is actually the room where John Paul II taught his students, particularly ethics. Now the chapel itself is quite beautiful. It's a mixture of both traditional Catholic styles as well as more modern Catholic styles. And it's one of those few chapels that is able to mix the two in a very perfect way. Sometimes, Catholic architecture is a little too traditional and imposing upon the congregation, and sometimes it's a little too modern and kitsch. This chapel is actually able to mix the two in a very beautiful way. And on top of that, as I said earlier, it houses several relics to John Paul II and is actually an open chapel, which means that students can always come in no matter what. Of course, they come more around exam times, but at the same time it's always open. And there's several student organizations revolving around Mass, Adoration, Rosary, and other such Catholic sacramentals. So here we are. Go on inside. So over here we have relics of John Paul II.
So where are we now? What is this?
Well, we're currently at the Collegium Johannes Pauli II. Now this is actually the new building connected to KUL, and it's where a lot of the visiting professors, memorial lectures, and general lectures are held. Now it was actually made with contributions from foreign Polish groups all over the world, also known as Polonia. So everything from Polish-American groups, Polish-English groups, Polish-Australian groups funded the creation of this university. And as such, it's kind of a symbol of the worldwide Polish community. So one way you could choose to come to KUL is through bicycle.
Estoy cantando.
And now there's two options you have with the bicycles. Of course, you can have a private bike, your own, but there's also a city bus, which is a public bike sharing service that Lublin is actually trying to promote. It's very easy. Via website, you can pay a small standard fee and then have access to all the bikes with this symbol anywhere in Lublin. So if you want to go from the Brama Krakowska down to Mickiewicza, you can, and you have the possibility. And they're pretty nice bikes as well. Now, if you choose to come here by taxi, you need to be a little bit careful, and you need to actually know some instructions about how to get a good taxi and avoid being overcharged.
How do I do that?
Well, why don't I tell you? Welcome to a very sunny and pretty Lublin. We took a little bit of a break from the Catholic University of Lublin, and now we're in the town to kind of give you a little bit of an idea what the town will look like when you first get here. Now, if you're a foreign student like me, your first problem is going to be what to do when you first get here. How do I get to KUL? How do I get to the dormitory? How do I get to my flat? Well, you have a lot of different options, but the easiest option is a taxi. Now there's taxis intermittently at other places as well. Sometimes they're outside of KUL, but you can't really rely on those taxis. They're there sometimes, not all the time. Now you have to be a little careful when you work with the taxis in Lublin. Some of them are privately owned, while other taxis are owned by a larger company. So you have to be careful. The biggest hint you have is the number that's on the side of the car. If the taxi is a repeating number, such as 11111, 77777, or 6666666, you're in for a good time. These are owned by a company, and therefore you're going to have a lower price. Now, if there's another number with different numbers, your basic phone number, you're in for a little bit more expensive time. Now these guys can charge 3, 4, and if they hear your accent, maybe even 10 times the regular price. Alright, so here we have a map of everything we've already seen. The chapel, the main building, the collegium, as well as the priest's dormitory. Now this is only one of KUL's campuses. There's 2 other campuses, Majdanek and Poczekajka. But for official business, this is where people usually meet, this is where people visit, and for classes, this is where the vast majority of them are held. A brief note about the Polish language, tu jesteś means you are here. So,
Here.
yes, so if you're lost, look for the little red dot with tu jesteś. Although, KUL's relatively small, you shouldn't get lost. Alright Michael, we're currently on the 10th floor of the collegium. And what we have right here is a beautiful panorama view of Lublin. You can see everything that Lublin has to offer. From the Opera House, to the Ogrodzowski Park, to even in the distance you can see the Old City, which is the old preserved Renaissance part of the city. Now, if you want to go, we can. Alright, so Michael, we're currently at Plac Litewski, which is a very beautiful and very historic park in Lublin. Now, sadly, it's under construction, but there's a lot of interesting things I could tell you about it, which is dedicated to Piłsudski. Now, Piłsudski was a Polish patriot, but I think I can tell you even more. Alright, so welcome to the Old City. Now, this is the more historical, cultural part of the town, and we're currently outside the Old City proper. But this is more with restaurants, and it's more of a Fußgänger zone, a place for people who to just walk, enjoy the town, enjoy the sun, enjoy the music, and relax and be a happy human being.
How long does it take to get here from campus?
It takes about 15-20 minutes, depending on how fast you can walk, but it's definitely worth the walk. And if it's your first time here, you have to come here.
It's lovely.
It is. Oh, interesting thing. So here we have the goat of Lublin. Lublin's official symbol is a goat. And there's a little bit of a story behind why it's a goat.
What is that?
Well, in the Middle Ages, Lublin needed to have a symbol, and they hired an artist. Now, this artist took the money that the town gave him, but was a little bit of a drunk, and drank way too much alcohol, and eventually died. Afterwards, they basically figured out, well, we already paid this guy, we need to get some of his sketches. So they went through his art book, and the best picture he had was one of a goat. And that's why Lublin is the city of the goat. So we're coming up to Brama Krakowska, or the Krakow Gate. Now this gate represents the historic border between the old town and the city outside. It's dedicated to the Virgin Mary, as you can see with the icon of Mary on there. And if you really want to get to the heart of cultural Lublin, you got to go through the gate. Lublin hasn't had many historical battles here, that's why it's so well preserved. But the few times it did, this was kind of the main fortification that tried to hold off invaders. Inside the gate, there's a lot of performers, whether they're musicians or actors or giant people dressed up as the Grim Reaper. There's a lot of people who are trying to, perform and get a little bit of your spare change. And if they impress you, give them a little bit of extra. So now we're inside the Old City, the oldest part of Lublin. The earliest parts of Lublin date back to the 12th century, and it was historically more of a trade town, a trade city. You had goods coming from Byzantium up to the Nordic countries. You had goods coming from Asia and Russia going to Western Europe, and you had goods from Western Europe going everywhere else. All right, Michael, right now we're underneath the Trinity Tower, which is a very large tower in Lublin that is dedicated to the Holy Trinity. You can go to the top and get a beautiful panorama view. But what we are going to do is actually walk underneath it and walk to the cathedral. Now, John Paul II actually visited this cathedral while he was Pope. There's actually a plaque commemorating it over there. This is actually a very, very beautiful cathedral in that all the art is incredibly well preserved. And after Vatican II, the only renovation they really did was renovate where the altar was positioned. So all of it is preserved the way it was originally. Now, the cathedral is one of the central locations for World Youth Day. It's going to be a place where some ceremonies, adoration, and masses will be celebrated. It's very much the central location, and you should know it wherever you are, although it's a little hard to miss. Alright, so we're in the Old City right now. Anyway, as you can see, some parts of the Old City are better preserved than others. This is because during the communist days, the communist government didn't want to preserve Polish history, and as such, all of it deteriorated. Even to this day, select groups are trying to renovate it, and they're doing a good job, but sadly, it's not entirely renovated yet.
There's some work to do.
Very much so. Now we're walking towards the Dominican Church. Now the Dominican Church is one of the oldest churches in Lublin, and the Dominicans have had a presence in this city since the Middle Ages. And with that, it's also historical because it was commissioned by several of the Polish aristocracy, including some kings, and it was also visited by John Paul II, who celebrated Mass here multiple times.
Really?
Mm-hmm. And a little bit of a note too, a little bit of a personal note, a lot of KUL students actually go to the Dominican Church for confessions because a lot of the priests speak English, and they'd prefer their professors not to hear their confessions.
That's fun.
So right now we're going to be walking towards Lublin Castle, or Zamek Lubelski. Now before we get there, we're going to see the foundations of the oldest church in Lublin, which sadly no longer stands. But after that, I could tell you a little bit more about the history of Zamek Lubelski and a little bit of its purpose. Now the great thing about the old city is that there's a lot of small, kind of thin roads, small and thin walkways like this. You can get lost in the maze of streets, but it's perfectly fine. You'll always find your way out. Alright, so behind us we have Zamek Lubelski, which is an old medieval fortification that was built by, I can't remember which Polish king, but it was made to defend the trade routes and trading rights of the city. Now, it has a very interesting history in that after it was built, it didn't have very much use until the Second World War, when it was used by both the Germans and the Russians as an ammunition store. Now, because it kind of served this military purpose of being a storage facility more so than a defensive fortification, it's one of the best preserved castles in Poland. And it actually includes a chapel that was built earlier and around the 1200s that is preserved in its original glory. All right, Michael, before you go, I have a small gift for you. A Catholic University of Lublin t-shirt.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed your time in Lublin.
I did. It's been a wonderful time here in Lublin. It is welcoming, inviting, and beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
Very good. Well, if you want to come to Lublin, the Catholic University of Lublin has several academic programs that are in the English language. The first of which is the both philosophy masters as well as philosophy PhD programs. If you want to come to a beautiful city, a beautiful school with a strong Catholic tradition and a history that goes back over 100 years, please consider the Catholic University of Lublin for your academic future.